Hi guys, for my final on the New Testament survey, I wanted to cover the reliability and the trustworthiness of what's documented in the New Testament. Have you ever met anyone who denied the existence of Julius Caesar or Socrates or Alexander the Great? Those historical individuals that we learn about in school and are told about on a fairly regular basis only have a handful of external written sources documenting their lives and their experiences. When we dig into the external sources that document Alexander the Great's conquests, right? Everybody knows who Alexander the Great is. But there is only a couple external sources verifying the claims of Alexander the Great. And most of the sources that we have were written by him himself. So when we dig into this, I want to make a note of how extraordinary it is that sources are still around that confirm the existence of someone 2,000 years ago. And I would like to point out that if there is a handful of sources found, right, that would mean that there was most likely dozens upon dozens of sources originally that did not make it through the generations. So we have 3 or 4 sources on Alexander the Great, but there are dozens of extra-biblical, non-Christian sources that talk about Jesus of Nazareth and his life and the workings that he did. We've got everything from Roman historians, Greek authors and historians, Jewish historians from this era that talk about Jesus of Nazareth, the public miracles he did, the healings, the raising people from the dead. We've got documentation of his followers. We have documentation of the Jewish leadership persecuting him. We have documented writings about Pontius Pilate, who led the trial and exacted execution on Jesus, even though historians and archaeologists for the longest time said Pontius Pilate never existed. And so we see history and archaeology and science catching up to the Bible at this point. So, for example, Celsus was a Roman historian, and he wrote a scathing review about the Christians in the mid-100s AD. And although it is a scathing and clearly a harsh review of Christians, we can pull a lot out of this. Celsus, in the mid-100s, wrote that Jesus, on account of poverty, was hired out to go to Egypt, and while there he acquired certain magical powers. He returned home elated, highly elated, at receiving these powers, and at the strength of them, that he gave himself out to be a god. It was by these means of sorcery that he was able to accomplish the miracles he performed. Let us believe that these cures, or the resurrections, or the feeding of the multitude with just a few loaves, is nothing more than the tricks of jugglers. It is by the names of certain demons, and by the use of incantations, that the Christians appear to be possessed of miraculous powers. And so in that one account, we see that Jesus of Nazareth was a real person that lived, that he spent early years in Egypt, that he had powers, that he specifically performed public miracles, and that specifically performed resurrections, that he had a following, that he fed multitudes with a few loaves, that his followers, the apostles, then after his death had powers to heal and to resurrect. We see that being in the mid-100s, that the Christian movement had expanded and grown after the crucifixion of Jesus. And so we can glean a lot from these accounts of Jesus, even though they aren't supportive. But there are dozens of accounts of the life and the workings and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, even down to the unpredicted eclipse and earthquakes that hit at the time of the crucifixion. And these are all parts of the story that let us know that the Bible is real, that there is historical documentation about these things, more about him than about any other first century person that we know existed. So I think if we are going to take an honest intellectual look at the historicity and the truthfulness in the Bible, I think there's overwhelming evidence that supports that these things not only happened, but that They are historically documented by some of the greatest thinkers of that era. So I think to not take the Bible serious would be intellectually dishonest and lazy. Thank you for your time.